Hello and welcome back to the SBK betting podcast as we turn our attentions fully to the flat. Last weekend saw us say a fond farewell to the jump season in the UK, and we should have known really that the champion trainer would dominate. Thankfully, TC and I knew that as we sided with Grenadine, who got the job done again at Sandown, and TC backed that up with his nap Alto. It's solid each 18-1 each way selection, and boom boom for Ross at 18-1 as well. So ready for the flat now, Ross?
Can't wait, Jess. Raring to go. Sent you all the decks at 2 minutes past this morning. I was on it.
We knew we'd convert you eventually, even though I've already had a sneak peek at the NAPs and next best. It's you can't keep yourself too far away from the National Hunt grenades, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So we do turn our attention to the flat, and we have been gifted a vintage renewal of the 2000 Guineas that even the most hardened of jumps fans can get on board with. We will get to that and the 1000 Guineas, the two classics, after a look at a couple of the supporting races at Newmarket this weekend. So really pleased that Tom Collins is back with us as well. And we'll get straight into it. The Suffolk Stakes over 1 mile, 1 furlong. It's a handicap at 225 at Newmarket. And races somewhat cut up a little bit looking at the declarations. And the Harby off 567 days, it said. So a long time is back. He's the current market leader at 9-2. Fast Medicine is 5-1. Move in Time is 17-2, along with Notre Belle Bet, 11-1. Forest Falcon, it's 12-1. Bigger the rest. TC, I'll come to you first. Dahabi, looking at this, it's a short enough price for a horse. Obviously, he promised a lot back in his 2-year-old days, but has to come off a long layoff and clearly has had problems.
Yeah, exactly. Look, he represents Godolphin, Charlie Appleby, William Buick, so he's going to be well found in the market no matter what. And he had good form as a 2-year-old. He wasn't beaten too far by one ruler. He's rated 107. So the fact he's coming in here is an interesting bit of placing by Charlie Appleby. But as you say, a 567-day layoff coming off a run in the autumn stakes as a 2-year-old. It's a completely different race, this. He's going to have to prove that he's the best horse and still retains all of his ability. I'm not 100% sure that he will win this race. But what I am 100% sure is that he's a terrible price, because you just don't know what Dahabi's going to turn up. Saying that, I think this handicap, despite the fact it's cut up since the initial entries, actually, I think there are a few horses in here that could be value plays. Fast Medicine's an intriguing runner. Notre Belle Bet's an intriguing runner. And my selection, which is Moving Time. I really like this horse. I like the fact that Roger Varian has run him here at Newmarket first time up, because last year, first time up, he absolutely bolted up at this track. He beat a horse called Kamari by 4 lengths. It could have been 14 lengths. He won with such ease. Then his season kind of went downhill. He had 2 other runs in the Hampton Court and the Steventon Stakes. He didn't reproduce that effort first time up. But Roger Varian said in a recent stable tour that this horse has had his problems with injuries. He's just not been sound. But I think now Roger Varian wants to get this horse on a clear run. And usually with horses that aren't sound, you want to catch them fresh. Moving Time comes in here fresh. He's booked Harry Davis, who's arguably the best £7 claim around at the moment. I think he's a decent plot horse and a very nice price.
Yeah, been gelded as well for this first start back as a 4-year-old. Oh, I couldn't forgive him for that run at Ascot, where I really fancied him in the Hampton Court Stakes. He must have picked up a couple of niggling issues after that, did he?
Yeah, I think Roger Varian said that after each of he takes his races really difficultly, really tough, and he doesn't seem to bounce out of them well. And obviously he had a month gap between the Hampton Court and the Steventon. He didn't really run to his level on either of those occasions. Saying that, he still finished mid-division in both races. That was a Group 3 and a listed race, both highly competitive events. This is a drop down to a handicap company. I just feel like he could be the class horse in this field. Everyone thinks Dahabi's the class horse, but it could easily be Moving Time.
Yeah, perhaps catching Moving Time fresh might be key as well. 17-2. I'd agree with TC that this is the wrong favourite. Do you think the same, Ross?
Echo everything you guys have said. I mean, I'd throw in as well that Dahabi was winning over a mile as a 2-year-old. 2 years later, he's a Frankel half-brother to Golden Horn. You'd suggest he's going to need further than this in time. And I just think that Charlie Appleby and Godolphin have done so well, particularly with their 3-year-olds last year, coming now in as 4-year-olds. I just think they're getting overbet in the market, and I agree. When I looked at the race, I didn't have a particularly strong opinion other than I wanted to take on him and Fast Medicine. Up £11 for winning at Nottingham. I think this is an entirely different sort of question, trying to win this off 90. The one I came down on, because I do agree with TC, I think it's very open. I think there's plenty of chances. Was Cap Francis for Ian Williams. 2 poor runs on the all-weather, but let's assume that he just doesn't like the all-weather. He's now down to 93, £2 below his last winning mark. I thought James Doyle was an eye-catching booking, and his run on this last run on the turf last year at Newbury was a mile 2 on soft. I think that probably stretched his stamina. All his best form is on a sound surface. I just think he's down to a nice mark now. Ian Williams is a trainer I really like, particularly in handicaps. He's got his string in very good form. TC found one, I think, last week. I just think he's there, ready to run a big race, whether it's this weekend or whether it's at some point in the season. But he's certainly a horse I'll follow because I think he's very well handicapped now.
Yeah, I always think that Ian Williams has some sort of plot up his sleeve a little bit with these horses, this type of horse that he got off Ed Walker when he promised a huge amount for that trainer. It never really materialized after his earliest wins.
Absolutely. And I think, he's obviously had an issue. He's away from the track for 6 months when he got back from Meydan, changed trainers, changed owners as well. So that, tells you that perhaps they'd found an issue. But yeah, Ian Williams is always one to follow, particularly picking up other people's horses. He's probably one of the most underrated dual purpose trainers we've got in the country, actually, because he does it year in, year out.
Yeah, he's got a good one with Enemy, doesn't he? That's one to follow after seeing him run a crack in the Cigar Estates. But that's Cap Francais at 28-1. I'm going to agree with the two guys about the openness of this field, and there's definitely value to be found. And I found it, I think, with Turntable, who's 12-1. Comes in here with a featherweight, and Holly Doyle booking is a big eye catcher for me when I saw that on the 5-day deck stage for Chris Wall, who is absolutely flying. He's got a 71% strike rate at the moment. He hasn't run a huge amount of horses, but they've all been running really well. He's had 3 winners from his last 7 runners. He only has a handful of horses running this weekend, and this is one of them. And I think that this horse, who is a course and distance winner, he was last seen winning here at double figure prices on his preferred quick ground. Just maybe rule out some of the runs where he hasn't had his ground, but I think he likes the track. And as I said, a nice weight as well for an event like this with Holly Doyle on board. And that's another one at a good price at 12-1. So bit of value around. Moving time for TC 17-2, Cap Francais 28-1 and 12-1 Turntable. Right, we'll head into the Palace House Stakes. 5 furlongs, the sprint, the quickest race of the day, and Twilight Calls, who put up a really good performance over course and distance last time, proved all the abilities that he did show himself to have last season, but he was pretty expensive enough to follow. 7 times he's gone off favourite in his career, and he's won twice out of those. He's the 3-1 market leader for this as it stands, and following him quite closely in behind is Tis Marvellous at 92, came from the darkest 5-1, Hurricane Ivor 6-1. TC, we talked about the wrong favourite in the first race. Is Twilight Calls the wrong favourite in the Palace House?
I think he's probably the right favourite, but I don't want to bet him at all. As you say, he struggled to get the job done when favourite before. He's a really strong travelling horse, which is why he always comes in for money and why he's well found in the market again. He impressed on his seasonal return. But if you look back last year, his best effort came at Newmarket. He beat a horse called When the Dealing's Done, who's actually in this field on Saturday. He gave When the Dealing's Done £2 and beat him by a neck. They're running off level weight, so you'd think Twilight Calls will confirm that form. But When the Dealing's Done is 33-1. Twilight Calls is a short price favourite. So I don't think his form necessarily stacks up well. Obviously, he could have improved from last season to this. And he was very impressive on his seasonal reappearance, but I can't be having him at the prices. I think he's going to travel into the race, probably trade quite short in running and then get beat. 4-year-olds have won this race 5 times in the last 6 editions, I have to say. So there is your case for Twilight Calls. I think he's going to get done in the closing stages. And the horse that I really like is Came From the Dark. He should have won this race last year when he was beaten by Lazuli. Holly Doyle, who's fantastic, didn't get the race right that day, unfortunately. She went to go for a gap on this hold-up performer. And just as she went to go for the gap, William Buick, very tactical and brilliant rider himself, cut across and just stopped Came From the Dark going for the run. That meant Holly Doyle had to rein back, cost him probably half a length to a length. The horse absolutely rattled home for second, beating a neck. 1 stride after the line was in front. Took an age to pull up as well. Obviously, that was his 3rd run last year, so he had previous race fitness on his side. This season, he's coming into the race fresh, but this horse has won fresh before. He clearly handles the track. The undulations cause him no problem, despite the fact he's a big, strapping colt. And the fact that he's coming into this race again suggests that Ed Walker maybe has targeted the affair. He hasn't got over the fact he got beat last year in this race. He wants to win this race this time around, and Came from the Ducks, my selection.
Yeah, I love this horse. He was so progressive last season, wasn't he, TC? He's lightly raced for his years, but he obviously had a setback. He had surgery, I've read, after the Coral Charge, which he won impressively. My question was the worry about the ground. He's obviously he's won on ground a lot softer than this, and that was my concern with a horse who's clearly fragile on quick ground after a long layoff. Would that worry you?
Yeah, I can definitely see that concern. The one thing I actually looked through his form and had the same thought process you. He's obviously won on soft ground before, and his best 5 furlong efforts prior to this race last year came on soft ground because he's a horse that gets further, and it's obviously better when the leaders aren't going as quick as they would usually go in a 5 furlong contest. However, in this race last year, the ground was good to firm. He handled it perfectly fine. He finished second, should have won. I'm willing to accept the fact that he's as good in these conditions as on soft ground. Obviously, a horse that's not so sound, you don't know how they're going to perform from one run to the next. But I think I'm going to err on the side of Came from the Ducks going to handle the conditions, and therefore he's a decent price at the likely odds.
Yeah, he's currently 5-1 as we record, and he's a horse with a profile that could make up into even better sprinter to what we've seen. We normally see, Ross, horses perhaps like fringe handicappers coming into group company trying to give this a go. I know from the past we've seen plenty of horses who've come from those big heritage handicaps, and it's their opportunity to run off level weights. Is there something like that in here for you?
Truthfully, no, and I'd echo what TC said. I think Twilight Calls has got plenty to do, winning a handicap off 94, stepping up into a Group 3. I think what you do get if you've been running in these big field handicaps is you do get plenty of race practice in there, so that they know their trade. And I think sprinting is a specialist trade, particularly over 5 furlongs. But the two I came down on, the two I think are the standout horse in the field are Tis Marvellous and Hurricane Ivor. I mean, Tis Marvellous is favoured by the weights, comes out quite a long way clear on ratings. Hurricane Ivor gets a £3 Group 3 penalty from last year for beating Tis Marvellous at Newbury. So strictly, you'd argue that Tis Marvellous might reverse the form, but I think Hurricane Ivor is very, very progressive. He's only a 5-year-old, so he's 3 years younger than Tis Marvellous, potentially has more to come. And all the way through last year, he just kept stepping up. His only poor runs were on soft ground. He just simply doesn't handle it. Finished the season badly with a poor run. But I think a 5-year-old back on quick ground on a stiff enough track over 5, he finishes off really well. I think TC's right. I think Twilight Calls will be, right there, but I think he'll get run down. And I think Hurricane Ivor's the one to run him down. I know he's got it to do at the weights, but I think he is very progressive. William Haggis, master trainer. He's just a horse I really like, and I think the market has perhaps overplayed his poor run at the back end of last year because it coincided with a sort of step up in class. But I think it was just the ground that beat him on that occasion.
Yeah, that's exactly what the connections have said as well. He's 6-1, definitely could rule out that run. He was actually a really good 2-year-old over in France. I remember him winning on Debbie, absolutely bolted up, and he's now moved to William Haggis, and right at the end of last season he really came to show the all those promises that he confirmed as a younger horse. He's definitely one that is intriguing this season, sort of being one of those fringe group horses. And William Haggis, it might have a nice sprinter, which he's not normally famed for being very good with. So it's just quite an interesting proposition, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing you'd say is I don't quite know when he arrived at William Haggis's last year, but he's had a winter with him. He's had a full prep. I think there could be plenty more to come from him. I really do. Okay,
well, a man who is pretty iconic when it comes to sprinters is Robert Cowell, and that's where I've laid down with his Atlas Bay. He's having his first start with this yard. He's picked up for over £100 by the Morleys in Midland Park from Marco Botti, which I thought was quite interesting that they sold this horse, because even though his form tailed off a little bit, not a huge amount at the end of the season, I do think with sprinters, there are points in their season when they are spot on, and sometimes they do go a little bit over the top. We get to this point of the season where they're running against each other week in, week out. I think this horse is at his best at the early point of the season. He has plenty of speed, and I think that the Palace House Stakes will set him up perfectly for him if Sean Levy, our SBK ambassador, gets him out there quickly from the stalls. I just think the running style should be suited if he's at the top end of the field, and if Levy shoots from the hip and starts well, uses his speed, I think it'll be really tricky to peg back. And I think that his run last time, you can put a line through that at the end of last season because he lost his hind shoe. So I think he's just a bit too big at 14-1. So we're all going against the favourite Twilight Calls, who's bidding to emulate his grandsire, who won this 20 years ago, Kailaki did, which makes me feel extremely old. But we go against Twilight Calls, and we're going to, for Ross, Hurricane Ivor at 6-1. For TC, a bit of Came for the Dark at 5-1. And for myself, Atlas Bay at 14-1. Okay, enough of the supporting races. Let's head into the big ones. We'll go straight into the QIPCO 2000 Guineas, run over the mile on Saturday at 3:40. And we've talked about this from an anti-post perspective, so I'll be really interested to see what TC and Ross think. Now we've got 2 days to go. Native Trail, the even money favourite. He's been really solid since he bolted up in the Craven, and he's got to oppose his stablemate Coroebus, who's 11-2, as well as Luxembourg for Aidan O'Brien, who's 11-2. Perfect Power is 10-1. Point Lonsdale 14-1, 18-1. Bigger the rest. Right, I've got a bit of trivia. The last favourite to win the 2000 Guineas was Churchill in 2017. Can either TC or Ross name the last 4 favourites of this race?
Go on, TC.
I have a point with this.
I know that Massar was one. Is the point they're all Godolphin?
Nearly, no. They're both Godolphin and Aidan O'Brien, but it's the point about what they went on to become after this race.
Oh, sprint. Oh, wait.
Derby winners.
Apart from Pinatubo, right?
Well, so Battleground in 2021, who went off favourite right before the off. Pinatubo 2020, 10 Sovereigns in 2019, Massar 2018. Massar went on to win the Derby, but the others, you could really say, they weren't really ideal for this trip, were they? Pinatubo ended up being a 7 furlong source, 10 Sovereigns was a sprinter, and Battleground, well, don't really know what happened to him.
A Cheshire winner.
My point is, do we have a completely different proposition with this favourite?
I mean, I do. I think he's an out and out miler, not a sprinter like Pinatubo definitely was. I don't think he's a Derby horse, I have to say. I think he'll get, if he goes to Epsom, I think he'll be overturned. But I think a mile suits him absolutely perfectly. Coroebus is a different option, or Coroebus, however we want to pronounce the other Appleby horse. I think he's a sprinter, but it'll be interesting to see how they both run in the 2000 Guineas.
Yeah, I just think, everyone has been trying to work out picking holes in Native Trail if they can. I'm just wondering, Ross, am I just clutching at shoestrings? I just find it really difficult to back an even money favourite in the 2000 Guineas, especially one with so much quality on paper.
Well, you're talking to the right man. I mean, I struggle to back an even money favourite at the best of times. But I have to say, I do think even money is a good price for him. I'd expect him to go off odds on. I'd be surprised if he's not odds on actually before Saturday. No, I think he is solid, and I think he is an out and out miler. I think they will campaign him at a mile. I'd be surprised if they stepped him up to anything above 10 furlongs. Maybe at the end of the season he just looks an out and out miler. I completely agree with TC. He handled a dip last time in the Craven, galloped strongly to the line. Yeah, I think he takes all the beating. I've come up with some alternative selections because we did I think largely tip him in the anti-post piece. So if you took odds against, then do you really want to go back in at evens? Maybe you do. I personally wouldn't. I agree with TC. I don't fancy Coroebus over this trip. Luxembourg we spoke about. I think he's going to need much further, and I don't like his head carriage at all. Perfect Power is probably the sort of fly in the ointment, so to speak. I don't think he was a confirmed runner when we last spoke about it. In fact, I think we did a Greenham, so he hadn't actually run, had he, in the Greenham. I think we were both confident he'd stayed a 7. I, at the time, was very unsure that he'd stay a yard further than 7, and I'm now really not sure, because he was very strong to the line in the Greenham over 7. Will he stay a mile at Newmarket? Is a bit of a question, but at the prices, I think he's a decent price, because I think he is as good a horse in terms of ability as Native Trail. I really do. I think he's a very, very smart horse. It's just whether he'll stay that extra furlong. But they seem confident he will. So I think at, was he 10, 11 to 1, I think is a decent price, from an each way angle. The one thing I thought was quite interesting this week is they've mentioned that he can get very hot headed to the start, which is something I pride myself on watching, and I'd missed it. So it might be you want to watch him get down to the start. They're talking they're going to try and lead him some of the way, and if he gets down to the start calmly and has not too bowled over, I think he's interesting, because he did stay 7 furlongs very well at Newbury. And then the other one I'd throw in, and I mentioned him anti-post. He's not got any shorter, so it wasn't a great anti-post tip, but Berkshire Shadow really impressed me in the early part of last year, and then his form tailed away. If they can, get him back, and they sort of mentioned that he wasn't the most robust physically last year and was quite a tall, angular horse. If he's filled out into a nice 3-year-old, he was 4.5 lengths behind Native Trail in the Dewhurst. Point Lonsdale was 3.5 lengths behind Native Trail. Berkshire Shadow is 4 times the price of Point Lonsdale. And the one thing you would say about Berkshire Shadow over the Dewhurst trip, he was staying on at the end. His dam stayed a mile. I'm confident he'll stay this trip. I think his form just tailed off last year because he was growing and gone a bit angular. So I wouldn't give up on him yet. 50 to 1, I think, or even bigger, is a big price. So Perfect Power and Berkshire Shadow each way, but I fully expect Native Trail to win this.
Okay, Berkshire Shadow 66 to 1. He either the form tailed off or everything just caught up with him. We always talk about this race as the last 2-year-old race of the season, and Native Trail has really been the exceptional 2-year-old. And what's different to the likes of Pinatubo, who had all the thoughts that he was going to be the next great coming, is that we didn't see him before this race at 3, and actually he just didn't materialize into 3-year-old. He was at 2. So at least we know that with Native Trail, Tom, and that's why there's so much confidence around him, and that's why he's so solid at the top of the market.
Yeah, well, generally I would agree with you that I wouldn't want to back an even money shot or an odds on shot. I also agree with Ross that he'll go off odds on in the 2,000 guineas or any Group 1 on the flat, especially early in the season when you don't know necessarily about what horse is going to turn up, the likes of Coroebus, who we haven't seen for such a long time. But Native Trail just has everything. He's so solid. He's 5 and 5. He's unbeaten. He represents the leading connections right now. They're informed connections too. He's got course and distance form. He stays the mile well. He was a champion 2-year-old, and he's already got an official rating of 122. If you look back in the last 10 years, the rating required to win the 2,000 guineas, actually the rating achieved by the 10 winners in the last decade, the average has been 122.3. So he's already proved that he is good enough to win the 2,000 guineas. He doesn't even need to improve further from what we've seen in the Craven for him to actually take this prize in a standard edition. And I don't even think this is a standard edition. It's not very deep, in my opinion. Coroebus, I know I said earlier that I don't think he's necessarily a miler. Now, I know he's won 3 races at a mile, but he's got such a high cruising speed. I think if they drop him back in trip to 7 furlongs, he will just make hay in that division because he can just travel into his races. I don't like the fact that he's not coming in here without a race either. Luxembourg, I agree with Ross about his head carriage. I know he won the Vertin Futurity, but he really didn't impress me that day. I thought when Ryan got him in the clear and he actually hit the front, he should have just gone away. But he didn't. He kind of just maintained that advantage in front. Now, I know the ground's completely different, the track's completely different, but that puts me off first time up, although Aidan O'Brien's done really well with his stock so far this season. And Perfect Power, I think I was the number 1 fan of him going down the Commonwealth Cup route this year, but unfortunately they've gone for the Guineas. I say unfortunately because I was on anti-post for the Commonwealth Cup.
Not too late.
True. I have still got the slip for the Commonwealth Cup, so I'm hoping. But I wouldn't be surprised if he did run a good race in here if he stays the mile. I'm just not convinced. I think he's more of a sprinter. So all in all, Native Trail just wins, I think.
Okay. So I would tend to slightly disagree that it's not a deep edition of the Guineas. I think if you look at last year's anyway, it's a lot stronger than that. 4 Group 1 winners and a champion juvenile sprinter in Perfect Power who adds that little bit of flavour into it. And obviously the usual Ballydor contingent. I feel like just before we move on to the 1,000 guineas and we get our final selections, have we done enough to talk about Coroebus? Because yes, we haven't seen him. We've seen him do this racecourse gallop. He looks like a beast. I will be so excited to see these horses in the paddock and physically see what they look like, because Coroebus and Native Trail look like as specimens, not too dissimilar, but Coroebus, based on pedigree anyway, should be a miler at least, maybe a 10 furlong horse. And in his running style, at least, because we haven't talked about how this race might even be set up, he might be a horse that will travel into it a lot better than Native Trail. I just want to touch on him really briefly, maybe Ross, get your thoughts on where you think or how he might fare, how you think he might fare.
I just can't get away from that run where he sort of just hit the front and dropped it slightly and curled up. Now I know James Doyle will be aware of that and will ride him differently, but I in a race like this, I don't like the fact that you've got an added complication that the race has got to fall right and the gaps have got to come when you want them to come. And I think that's the one thing Native Trail has got going for him. He's very straightforward, or he's become very straightforward. I could see Coroebus travelling very well. I don't think William Buick would mind at all if Coroebus got first run and towed him along a little bit further. I just think that
you're going to be his pacemaker.
Well, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying I don't think that Coroebus getting to the front early is going to be ideal. And I think if Native Trail gets to the front early, Coroebus isn't going to get back to him. So I just think that's the problem that James Doyle and Godolphin, if you can call it a problem, are going to have. I just don't see how Coroebus can beat Native Trail.
He's also drawn in stall 1 as well, Coroebus, and Native Trail's in 15. So they're literally both on the flanks. It's going to be an intriguing way that this race is going to pan out. William Buick and James Doyle are probably going to try and find cover. So it would just be intriguing. In the first furlong, you'll probably know your fate with the likes of Coroebus. Native Trail, not so. I'm sure he'll be dropped in midfield and it will all be fine for him. But if Coroebus is keen throughout the early stages, first time up this season from a wide draw, you'd be a bit worried.
That's a really good point, because we've seen how much the draw has affected the chances of horses in this race and the 1,000 guineas. And touching on the draw is really important. So you're out on the wing on for both of these Godolphin horses, but you'd rather draw 15, essentially, what you're saying, TC.
Yeah, exactly. They're probably going to come down the middle, which is what they tend to do in the Guineas. But obviously, sometimes they can come towards the stand side, which proved a good place to be earlier this season. Native Trail hasn't got as high a cruising speed as Coroebus, so I'm sure they're going to go some gallop. It's a Group 1. I'm sure he'll just sit in mid-div and it will be perfectly fine. But I'm a little bit worried that Coroebus is just going to be left out on the flank with no cover, and a horse that's fresh with such a high cruising speed that he has. In the first furlong, I would be intrigued to see how he's going under James Doyle, because you'd want to see him settled if you're on him. If you're not on him and he's pulling on and reefing on the right-hand side or left-hand side of the TV screen, as we'll look, and you're on Native Trail, you're thinking, here we go then.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at the draws, because Royal Patronage, who normally does a lot of early work, if they will make all with him, not certain, but he's drawn 6. So you could see it sort of becoming a bit of a diamond formation up like that, and it might benefit William Buick, who can do whatever he wants seemingly. The horse hits his sort of customary flat spot. Well, I think that we've all, and I would echo, because I loved Native Trail and what he did in the Craven. I thought, even though he didn't really beat a massive amount, and I think that Perfect Power might have achieved a lot more than a Native Trail did in winning the Greenham. He looks like the 3-year-old they wanted him to turn into, and I think that's really, really crucial. But I think, like Ross, is probably a bit of value around. So just at each way prices, and there has been a few shocks that have made up the pacings in the past to sort of chase home Native Trail. I was so taken by Aiden at Newmarket a couple of weeks ago. I was surprised that they threw him in here, but because I'd imagine he's more of a 10 furlong horse, but there's only 1 Guineas. But he did suit the Newmarket a couple of weeks ago, and he probably would have won that race over a mile anyway. He's a fabulous looking horse. He's got a really strong cruising speed. He's drawn quite wide in 10, and I just think he's a nice price at 28-1. As is, and this is a bit of a wild Ross Millar kind of suggestion, but Takarib Bay is 66-1. I don't think he was suited by the fast of the race that he was in last time at Newmarket. I think a bigger field, a really strong gallop will really benefit this horse too. I know the Richard Hannon team, regardless of their quite patchy form at the moment, have loved this horse from day one. I think he can do a lot better than 66-1 suggests. So few outsider or each way selections for the Guineas, which myself, Ross and TC thinks is going to be dominated by Native Trail at even money. So something to keep you interested in what looks like is going to be the favourites race to lose, if anything. Right, okay, we'll head on to the 1,000 Guineas on Sunday. We're recording on Thursday, so we don't have the final declarations. But I think at this moment, you would imagine we would know if something isn't going to run, and their prices have reflected like because of that. The likes of Prosperous Voyage has taken a big market drift as looks like she's going to head over to France. So currently, Tenebrism is the favourite at 3-1. Obviously, we have known Spiral. The last time we did the anti-post check on this, she was in this race. Discoveries are 6-1. Tuesday 13-2. Malaveth for Francis Graffard over from France 15-2. Mise en Scene 11s with Wild Beauty and Zelly, and 16-1 figured the rest. This is open, I believe. And from a pedigree perspective, anyway, Ross, I know you love your pedigrees. A heap of these fillies are bred to win a Guineas. Discoveries is a sister to Alpha Centauri. Tenebrism, a daughter of a Group 1 miler. Tuesday, a sister to a Guineas winner. Toy, a sister to Glen Eagles. Mise en Scene's Dam is a half to Speciosa. This is what you want from a 1,000 Guineas.
It absolutely is. I agree that it's open, but I'm surprised that Tenebrism is still as big as she is, particularly with Inspiral coming out. We've not got an awful lot to go on, and I'd be one that I like to sort of cross-check lines of form, and I can't do this with Tenebrism with just 2 runs. But I think sometimes you have to trust your eyes, and what she did in the Cheveley Park was mind-blowing to my mind. She took an age to get going. She'd been off the track for, I think it was 5 months, having won a maiden in March, and she absolutely flew home and stayed on so strongly to the line. There is maybe a marginal question mark on her pedigree, whether she's an out-and-out miler. As you said, Dam Immortal Verse won a Group 1 over a mile. Caravaggio may be a bit more of a sprinter, and hasn't thrown an awful lot of stamina laden stock so far, but he's still in fairly early days. But they seem very confident she's going to stay. They seem to have sort of been very happy to go straight there. Whether she's difficult to train, and that's why she had sort of such a long time between her first run and her second run last year. But yeah, I just loved what she did, and I'm surprised, given the stable she's with, she's not shorter. Now maybe TC will argue that that's a bit of a negative, in that from this sort of stable, if they're fancied, they're stronger in the market. But yeah, she blew me away watching the Cheveley Park. I would have fancied her to have beaten Inspiral anyway. I think with Inspiral gone, it makes her job a bit easier. And I thought 3-1 was a big price.
Yeah, so I took the opposite view, because at anti-post time, I thought she was too big, because I fancied her over Inspiral. Now Inspiral's out, I'm not too sure if that's the right price. I think of a horse who hasn't done a huge amount of racing and has had her problems, that I don't know if 3-1, which she currently is, and she might get shorter, is a little bit risky when there are some other lovely Aidan O'Brien fillies in this. And don't forget, all of his second, third strings have been winning this race recently. You've got to go back to Minding in 2016, who was the last winning favourite of Aidan O'Brien's to win this. And he's had what I can look at now, 4 winners since then that have been sort of good value prices. So we'll come to maybe the others next. Outside of that, Toy and Tuesday. Toy is 22-1. Tuesday is 13-2. What have they done, maybe TC, to suggest that they should be so much bigger? Obviously, they've won maidens, but looking at the results that Aidan O'Brien has had in this race, you should never overlook his fillies that are coming into 1,000 Guineas.
No, exactly. Obviously, Tenebrism is going to be favourite because of the visual that she produced in the Cheveley Park. Like, it was all over social media, and hype horses like that tend to go off shorter prices than the likes of Tuesday, who won a little maiden that probably most people didn't see at the time. But Tuesday's beautifully bred, and it was a mile maiden. So she's proved at the trip. She's by Galileo out of Lily Langtry. So the breeding is impeccable. But Tenebrism is coming here as a sprinter. Now she has to prove whether she's a miler. She's already top rated. So if she is a miler, she's by Caravaggio, who had plenty of speed, but as you say, out of a dam that won over a mile, Group 1 over a mile. If she gets the mile, she deserves to be favourite and win this race, but I'm not convinced. look, you can take the 3-1, 11-4 either way. She could be value because if she gets the mile, she should be 7-4. She's only had 2 starts, represents leading connections, has course form, and she's already proved how good she is over sprint trips. But also, if she doesn't get the mile, you're thinking, why on earth was this filly such a short price in a deep edition where you can make a case for so many?
Exactly.
It's a real tough conundrum. I've taken the approach that you have in imposing her. I actually think Tuesday is probably the better bet out of the Aidan O'Brien horses. But if you look back at Aidan O'Brien's recent record in this race, which is brilliant, the horses he's been winning with have had loads of races at 2. You've got Love in there. Homecoming Queen had about 1 million races as a 2-year-old. Winter and Minding are 2 horses that were lightly raced, but they were milers from the outset, not sprinters like Tenebrism. Mother Earth last year had a whole selection of races as a juvenile. So did Hermosa. So Tenebrism is a completely different horse for Aidan O'Brien coming into 1,000 guineas. I think you have to have a lot of trust and belief in her getting the trip. But if she does, then she's probably going to win this race. I've taken the decision to oppose her, and the horse that I want to oppose her with is Malavath. French horses haven't done notoriously very well in this race, but they've had a couple of places and a couple of winners. And I think Francis Graffard's going to have a brilliant day on Sunday, by the way. I should just mention Christophe Soumillon's coming across, a sexy Soumillon double, I reckon. And Malavath is going to be the second of the 2. We'll come to the first when we do NAPs and NBs. But Malavath, she's only £2 shy of Tenebrism with an official rating of 113, Tenebrism rated 115. But crucially, she's proved that she handles a mile. She hasn't run at Newmarket, but what she has done is prove that she's very agile. She ran at Del Mar in the Breeders' Cup, broke slowly, was drawn really wide in gate 12. And that turf track is so tight, but she negotiated it really nicely and finished second to a filly called Pizza Bianca, who ran second the other day and has loads of potential going forward. I loved her reappearance at Deauville earlier this month. She beat Zelly, who's in this field as well, and also has a good chance for Andre Farb. Tom Marcan takes the ride, which is a good booking. And that day, she proved that she trained on from 2 to 3. So I like Malavath. I think she's the most solid option. But as I say, it's a real difficult conundrum with this favourite Tenebrism.
Yeah, 15-2 for Malavath. A lot of shrewdies over the last week or so have been talking to me about Malavath, and considering they do have their own option in France of their French alternative for this, I think the ground is key also for her because she clearly likes the quicker surface.
Yeah, I mean, Del Mar, it was absolutely rattling. It was practically a road, and she flew home for second, despite a terrible trip, as I mentioned. Ryan Moore gave her a good ride that day, given she's a juvenile, and she hadn't learned everything on the job prior to that effort, but I feel like she learned so much at Del Mar, and you kind of saw that at Deauville earlier this month. I think we're going to get a new filly coming into this race, and Christophe Soumillon is one of the best pilots around. We don't get to see him so often on UK shores, but when we do, he always makes his mark.
Yeah, he certainly does. Malavath, daughter of Maymas, as you say, big run there in the juvenile turf with a couple of British trained runners in Cachet and Hele You also lining up. So if she can hold that form, she's definitely got 2 beat already in going into this field. And Mise en Scene, sorry, I forget to say as well, who lines up as well. So yeah, interesting views one way and the other for Tenebrism. Ross, I know you always like something at a bigger price as well. Is there anything hidden within there that we should look for a bit of a value bet?
Well, without wanting to sound like an Andrew Balding fanboy, and I mentioned her again in the anti-post, Sandrine. I followed her last year. I loved. She's tough. She does everything right way round in her races. I was desperate for her to finish the season off over a 7 furlong race last year, and they didn't. They kept it to 6. She's been crying out for this step up in trip. Again, she was fairly well beaten by Tenebrism in the Cheveley Park, but she stuck at it really well. I think she'll improve for a step up in trip. I like the fact that both her and Tenebrism have shown they can handle the dip. I think that's something that's not to be overlooked. And I think if there's one to step forward from what they've done, it could be her. And again, comes in without a prep race, which is never all that confident inducing. But I think she's a smart filly in the making, and I think she can step forward for this step up in trip.
18-1, and Andrew Balding team, who weren't quite firing about a couple of weeks ago, this week they certainly have, which is always important. Yard form. I definitely think that his yard is just peaking right at the right time, don't you think?
Yeah, had a nice debut 2-year-old winner as well, which suggests that they perhaps starting to get a grasp of to where they are fitness wise, which, you know, it's annoyed me a bit this winter that famously, you know, training racehorses isn't all that difficult. Well, keeping horses that aren't racing happy and healthy is difficult. It is very difficult, and people don't, and I think the sport doesn't do it well enough that we don't get across just how difficult it is to get these horses right. And it slightly irked me that this Inspiral story never really was properly talked about. You know, it happens. It's horses, and I think there was a chance for the sport to say, look, this is how difficult it is. Our best trainer has missed the target because the horse isn't right, you know, and they're not machines. But yeah, I think the fact that Andrew Border had a debut winner this week will perhaps boost their confidence. They'll know where they're at fitness wise, because they look like one or two were needing it, like you say, at the start of the year. So yeah, I think she's an interesting one at a big price.
Yeah, certainly. And it's, you know, to get them up to their prime so early on in the season is not easy at all. And as we said before we started recording, it's still cold. And for these fillies coming in their coats, again, this will be interesting to see what they are looking like walking around the paddock, who looks well in their skin. I can't imagine any of them is going to look absolutely fantastic because it will be chilly. But that's just an interesting element. A man who is in sensational form is Aidan O'Brien. I'm taking a lot of confidence in what I've seen this week watching his runners. And that's why Tenebrism, obviously, I just think it might be too short for me now. I liked a couple of weeks ago prior to Inspiral coming out. But I think that at the prices 22 to 1 for Toy and 13 to 2 for Tuesday, two fillies who are bred to be really, really good, better than what they've showed. Obviously, maybe have taken a little bit of time to come to hand. They're not the likes of Love and Snowfall, who are really busy 2-year-olds. But they have definitely, or they've already been out this season, and they could just be better than what they've already showed. And I like finding value in this kind of race. So 13 to 2 about Tuesday, and Toy 22 to 1, which is crazy. And we'll be interested to see jockey bookings as well for those, because I think Frankie Dettori is now available. So that is the 1,000 guineas. We've had a good chat through both of the classics, which they do deserve. But we will head on and get the next bests, the NAPs and the next bests from Ross and TC for this classic weekend. Don't forget the new customer offer, which is available for SBK, for new customers for SBK. Deposit £10 and get £30 in free bets, and T's and C's always apply. So TC, take it away.
Yeah, we're doing a Christophe Simeon Francis Graffard double here with the NAP and next best. The next best we've already covered, which is Malavath in the 340 at Newmarket, the 1,000 guineas on Sunday. The NAP is also on Sunday in the 3 o'clock at Newmarket, a filly called Abeira. So Michael Stout has won the Dahlia Stakes a record 6 times. He runs Ville de Grace in this race, and she's likely to be a short price favourite. But she's coming off a long layoff, and her best effort last year was with Giving the Ground. So I'm not 100% sure she's going to be firing first time up. And I want to oppose her. I think she's a bit of a false favourite. And Abeira looks the perfect horse to take her on with. Francis Graffard's not going to send her over for no reason. Look, I know he's got a runner in the 1,000 guineas, and she may be just accompanying her on the journey over. But this is a real high-class filly who travelled out to Riyadh earlier this year and finished a really good third in the Neon Cup, actually. A race that had runners from all over the globe. And she ran on really taking in the closing stages without ever threatening. Now, last time up, she was equally intriguing. She finished third at Longchamp at a short price. Now, anyone looking at the form book will go, gosh, she's been beaten at 6 to 5 here. Do I really want to be backing her next time up? Now, she had clear excuses that day. It was her first run after coming back from Saudi Arabia and a couple months layoff. I think she probably needed the run. And she actually moved into the race beautifully as well. Christophe Simeon takes the ride. I really like Abeira. I think she's a value price at around 4 to 1.
Abeira and Malavath, the sexy Simeon double. We enjoy that. And I'll just stick mine in just quickly to keep a Newmarket focus, because I know Ross is going slightly off piste. For maybe not as sexy, but a Michael Dodds double in the shape of Gale Force Mayer, who I think has got an exceptional chance in the Kilvington Stakes at Newmarket, the first race on Saturday. Moved from Nottingham, which I'm sure is very much pleased Michael Dodds, who knows that his filly, his mare now, absolutely thrives at Newmarket. She won by just a nose over course and distance a couple of weeks ago. The Michael Dodds team continue to be in flying form all around the country. Coroebus as well, his number one jockey, will be on board, and I think that she's got a cracking chance to just to essentially emulate what she did last time. She's a filly with lots of speed, especially now in listed company. And then the second horse for the Michael Dobbs double is the Flat Rod, who's an intriguing horse, coming back off a bit of a break. Son of Mason, he does exceptionally well with his sprinters, and I think that this horse who did pretty much faultless last season could have another big year as a 4-year-old, and I think he's too big as it stands at 11-1. So that is 2 Michael Dodds runners to add to TC selections at Newmarket this weekend. So Ross Millar, take it away.
So yeah, as you say, I'm moving to the feature card of the day. The jumps racing back at QIPCO. My nap comes in the 4:39. Tim Vaughan trained Clemencia. Been waiting for him all year. Unfortunately, his last run at Huntingdon didn't coincide with a podcast, so I wasn't able to put him up, but I had mentioned him on the SBK platform in the handicap piece. He won that night over 2 mile 3. He is up £6, but he's also up another 3 furlongs in trip on good ground. I think that 3 furlongs in trip will help him defy the rise. So Clemencia in the 4:39 is the nap. And then the next best is in the 3:30 at Oxter. Frankie de Burle for the Bowen team. He's £3 now below his last winning mark. He won on this card over 2.5 miles last year, staying on strongly at the death. Step up to 3 miles on good ground will suit him well. And the Bowen team do very well through the summer. This could well be a prep race for the summer plate at Market Rasen, which he won last year. So Frankie de Burle is the next best.
Fabulous. Well, that's all we have time for this week. We've had a real good look at the 2,000 guineas and the 1,000 guineas. Lots to look forward to, plus a little bit of extra for your national hunt needs. TC, Ross, as ever, many thanks. Make sure to like, subscribe, and we will be back as always next week. And we hope you enjoy what is set to be a brilliant classic weekend.